Well, let's get started then. And I'll just talk a little bit briefly, and then I'm going to hand it over to Micheal Sears. I'm Jessica Powers. I'm publisher at Catalyst Press. And as many of you know, a few years ago, we launched this Reading Africa initiative the first full week of December. And this is the fourth annual one. And we're really trying to make this a viral thing that goes and gets way beyond us and is out of our control, and something that in the 10 years, nobody knows that Catalyst started it. So, not that we don't want to take credit, but just because we really think this is important and something that needs to happen, and we want to celebrate African literature. So, hashtag Reading Africa or hashtag Reading Africa Week across social media, all kinds of literature, all genres, from children's on up. We just want to celebrate the diversity from the continent and get people reading. And so that's what this is about. And then this panel we put together, I am such a huge fan of international crime novels in general, and in particular crime novels from South Africa. As an American living in South Africa and traveling through the country copiously over the last number of years, of course, when I first lived there, the amount of crime and the way people lived in South Africa was sort of astonishing to me. And so I've always been very fascinated with crime novels in South Africa. And a number of years ago, I wrote an article about crime novels in South Africa. And I was really particularly compelled by something that Andrew Brown said, which was because I wondered, why would anyone want to read crime novels in a country that's so beset by crime? And one of the things that he said, and I'm paraphrasing very broadly, but he said, actually, people don't read crime novels if they don't have hope. And so the fact that crime novels are a flourishing genre in South Africa indicates that people do have a real sense of hope and a belief in the justice system. Even if the justice system isn't completely working and is imperfect and has some corruption, there's a sense of, this is the bar, this is what we should be meeting, we know it, and therefore we can immerse ourselves in these books about it because we do have a belief around it. And I thought that was such a compelling way to think about it and a hopeful way to think about it. And I've always loved that. So with that said, I'm going to turn this over to Micheal Sears, who's our panelist, or not our panelist, our moderator. I'll let you take it from here and introduce the panelists, etc.
Right. Well, thanks very much, Jessica. And I'd just like to thank you and your team and Catalyst Press for this initiative and putting it all together. And really looking forward to the discussion tonight. I guess I'll start off with myself. My name's Micheal Sears. I'm half an author with Stanley Trollope, who's also here on the in the audience tonight, having a day off, as it were. So together we write the Michael Stanley novels, and our series is set in Botswana. It's a series of police procedurals featuring detective. But the focus of this panel is really South African crime fiction, of course. So we do also have a South African-based standalone thriller called Dead of Night, which is around the rhino poaching. So that's me. And actually what I'd like to do is rather than tell all the authors who they are and what they've done, I would actually like to go to them and ask them to tell us a little bit about themselves and about their writing. So Sifiso Mzobe, could we start with you? Catalyst Press is about to release your novel Young Blood in the US. When Young Blood first came out here in South Africa, it won a suite of prizes and lots of critical awards, and it's really great that it's going to be getting a wider audience now. And it's sort of a very, I'm not going to try and tell people what the book's about, because I'm hoping that you're going to do that. It's sort of, to me, it was a very different coming of age style book. And I just wondered what motivated you to write the book originally. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and about the book, and how you came to write it, that would be fantastic.
Okay, thank you very much, Micheal. I'm Sifiso Mzobe. I'm a writer and translator and a content editor. My novel Young Blood came out in South Africa in 2010. Uh, the way I can describe it is it's a coming of age story that is set in a world of crime. The book, in writing the book, I wanted to make sense of my surroundings here in Umlazi, because Umlazi is like the castle and capital of KZN. So I wanted to understand why people take this route of being Catholic, because it's almost like a rite of passage. Um, but the mission was twofold as well. I'd always had the dream of writing a book because I've been an avid reader all my life, and like people, people can thank my high school teachers because they always read my compositions in class. So I decided to just put pen to paper, and I went for it, you know. The in Young Blood, what came out of Young Blood is all the questions that I had. So all the answers to all the questions that I had about all of this came out in Young Blood, and it was just like I was like a deer caught in the headlights with with the reception of the book and everything, and all the love that I got from other writers as well. So Young Blood, yeah, came out, and I was so happy when Jessica reached out to me, and had deep understanding of the book. Just it was so overwhelming as well. So in writing that book, I wanted to understand those the questions that I had. Yeah, so that's what Young Blood is all about. And I also have a collection of short stories that came out this year. I've been telling myself that I'm not a crime writer, but I think I am. I think I am now. I've seen all the stuff that I've been writing all along, my short stories and the other book that I've been working on, and I see that I'm a crime writer, because I think in writing crime, there are a lot of things that you can do. It's such a big canvas, So yeah, that's what I'm all about.
Yeah, I think once you get into crime writing, and it's quite hard to get out of it, perhaps.
Yeah, true.
But Mike, if we move to you, um, you're one of the best known crime fiction authors in South Africa, and you've also done a great deal to support the development of it here. So not only in terms of what your own writing and what you've done to publicize South African crime writing, but you offer writing masterclasses. But you started your novel writing career in literary fiction, and then you moved to quite a different writing style for your crime fiction. Would you tell us a bit about that, and how your books developed from that almost that stylistic decision? And of course, anything else you'd like to say about yourself and your suite of books?
That's kind of you. I thought you were going to tell me about myself, which would have been much more interesting. But I started actually writing poetry, and the novels grew out of the poetry, and went that way for 4 literary novels. And then, as they say, I saw the light, and I was instructed to have a look at crime fiction. And the person instructing me was my partner, Jill. And when she instructs, I have to listen, which I did. And for that, I'm very thankful, because she opened a whole new genre for me. I started reading crime fiction. I thought it was just absolutely wonderful stuff. Apart from the fact that it allows you to comment quite vociferously on your country and the foibles of your countrymen. And as the rest of the country was getting into crime at about the same time, a lot of them far more lucratively than I was, I have to admit, I thought that it was an excellent way to record going on in South Africa. And this, Jessica, brings me to an interest which I think is about crime fiction as well. And that is that there's been a lot of non-fiction written about the crime in the country at the moment. And I think those books have an immediacy and then they die and go away. Whereas I think it's going to be the crime fiction, which is going to be the historical record. And it's those books, and it is what is put into those books, which will in future show how we lived now. So I think from that point of view, the novel, and the crime novel in particular, has a great deal of resonance and pertinence in South Africa at the moment. Michael, I think that kind of wraps me up. I've done a lot of non-fiction writing as well and thoroughly enjoy that. And at the moment, the great joy in my life is teaching online courses in fiction and non-fiction, and then a masterclass, which runs for 9 months of the year. And I've been doing that for 8 years, and it's produced quite a clutch of books by the writers that have been on that class. And there are even more coming out next year, I'm pleased to say. So I think teaching people is better even than doing your own writing sometimes. So I've been really lucky to have these authors on that masterclass and to have their books published.
Yeah, no, indeed. That's as I mentioned, that's a wonderful contribution in its own right. Jessica, you wanted to say something, and just a general comment to the panel. I'd really like it, and I think the people here would like it too, if when you have a comment to make, please chip in and make it. I think that's more fun than me trying to drag questions or comments out of everybody.
Well, thanks, Michael. I just wanted to respond real quickly because I think Mike made a really important point about nonfiction. And I read a lot of the nonfiction crime in South Africa too, because I'm personally interested, but I couldn't publish it. It's so local and so specific. Whereas the crime novels, the fiction, does breed kind of, I think, a universality, even though it's very specific. And like Young Blood is so specific in its setting and its place, but it's something anybody around the world can read and gravitate to. Whereas, a nonfiction book about, as an example, those murders that were in Stellenbosch, the young student, etc. Fascinating read. I enjoyed it, but it was just so specific and local that unless you had a lot of knowledge about South Africa in general, you're going to miss so much. So I just wanted to I thought that was a really interesting point that you made, Mike.
Yeah, and I think as well, in fiction, you have such a wide canvas, and you can play around a lot. You have this. There are so many tricks that you can use to bring a point across. So I like fiction for that, because you can just play around. You don't have to be too direct. You can drag out some parts, because when in nonfiction, you have to just tell the story as it is, no matter how literary or creative you may try to be. And the story is already known sometimes. So with fiction, you can play around. You can show your skill as well. You can use like your short sentences like Mike does. You know what I mean? So yeah. So that's what I like fiction for.
Well, actually, that's perfect, because that links to what I wanted to ask Ameera. Ameera, you're a very talented actor and playwright, and you decided to branch out from there and write a novel, and Outside the Lines has come out again with a lot of acclaim, your debut novel. Yeah. And I watched an interview that you gave on the SABC in which you called writing a novel the ultimate power. And I wondered what you meant by that, and then how did you come to write the book in the first place? And it really just links in with what Sifiso just said, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's, so I've got my background in theatre, but actually I wrote the novel before I wrote any of the plays. It's just that it got published, it took a while for it to get published. So while I waited, I wrote some plays. But I think for me, the power thing comes from a theater understanding where as an actor you've got one role that you're fulfilling and you're bringing a character to life, or you're a set designer and you're creating the world visually, or you are the director and you're in charge of the bigger picture of everything. And then I found that writing the novel, you've got to be a little bit of everybody. Introduce people into this world. So I think that's what you were also speaking to, Jessica, is even though we are creating these worlds that are very local and they're very specific to South Africa, and mine is very specific to Johannesburg, is that because we are welcoming the reader into that space, we give a little bit more detail and a little bit more kind of life and play to it than in a non-fiction sense. Then I think you would. Yeah. I think you're muted, Michael.
Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to know how you actually came to write the novel. You say you wrote it first. Was it just always something you wanted to do?
I did. I did my master's at UCT in at Wits. I did my undergrad at UCT and my master's at Wits in creative writing, and it was so I created the novel during the master's. So it was my master's piece.
Okay.
And
all right. Well done then. So that's similar to what Mike was saying earlier on. I'm getting a bit of feedback on this. I don't know if there's a... Okay, that sounds a bit better. It just occurs to me that I was asked 3 times at the beginning of this panel to mention that this was being recorded, and I think that I forgot to do that. Despite that, the reason for that is that it's going to be edited and then put up as a YouTube video so that people can see it in the future, which is a great initiative. So, but I need to warn everybody of that in case something you say you don't want to have recorded or whatever. Anyway, let's move on to Bettina. Bettina's written several books, several novels, and novels have really big themes: physical abuse, corruption, bigotry, and generally the women are the victims. And I just wondered if that was a sort of the original motivation for the work, and if you could tell us a little bit more about the novels and your writing.
Okay, I think the first thing I need to say is that I'm the only person on the panel who writes in Afrikaans. So that's already interesting. And my interest has always been gender-based work. I started as an attorney and I did a lot of gender-based work as an attorney. And so that's the background that I write from. The first novel I wrote was not a crime fiction novel. It was literary fiction. It's a book called Troos vir die Gebrokenes. And in that, I addressed the issue of domestic violence. The rest of the books is a set with a central character, Nikki de Veer. And it deals with things like corrective rape and all the other issues that you already mentioned. Nikki, of course, is interesting in that she is certainly in Afrikaans the first Black gay main character. So that was something that was very important to me to give that character life. But really, I started writing because gender issues are important to me, and I thought that is something that needs to be addressed in a non-confrontational, more, I don't want to say entertaining manner, but in a way that doesn't confront when people read. And that's it. You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm muted again. Sorry, I'll get there. Don't worry. Okay, so let's move on to some rather more general topics now. And I'm hoping that the panel will come in on all of these. And the first one's a really big one, and it's also one that's perhaps relevant to this initiative because it's growing outside South Africa. So what I'd like to know is what the panel thinks makes crime fiction special and interesting to readers outside the continent. And indeed, I mean, one possible answer to that is, well, no, South African crime fiction is about South African crime fiction, and South Africans are interested in it, and maybe people overseas are not. And I don't believe that. And I doubt that the panel does on the whole. And there have even been suggestions that there should be such a thing as African noir or something like that as a subgenre to challenge Nordic noir. Maybe we've got a bit of a way to go before we get there, but it's worth thinking about. So actually, I wanted to go back to Jessica and ask you, Jessica, if you'd kick this off by talking a bit about the philosophy behind your Africa series and what the response has been in the US. I mean, obviously, you also think that there's a much broader market and much broader interest in African crime fiction.
Yes, sure. I guess there's been a remarkable surge of interest in international crime novels in North America in the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, I think starting with a real interest, of course, in Norwegian crime novels because of the, I'm going to get the name wrong, but the Dragon Tattoo Lady novels. I can't even think of the title right now.
The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
Yes, thank you. And then it's kind of moved from there. And of course, we've had with Netflix an explosion of shows that are international crime in France, in Norway, and various places. And I think that we haven't really yet understood that the continent of Africa is also a burgeoning place of potential for this. And so I believe and hope that it's going to be the next big thing. And you can see, some beyond just the Africa Crime Reads series that we launched at Catalyst, which is primarily Southern African fiction, but crime fiction. But you can see at Cassava Republic, they've been doing a crime fiction series, and then Akashic Books, which does this noir series, published Lagos Noir recently, that has crime fiction by primarily Nigerian writers set around the city of Lagos. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. Sorry. And so I do think that we're just at the cusp of beginning to understand that I think we're at the cusp of beginning to understand that there's a whole literature and literary world on this continent that's been essentially ignored by North American publishing, except for a few authors here and there. So it's not just crime writing, but I think that that's a genre that people are going to find fascinating. And the setting is so different than anything else. I mean, even though international crime novels in Europe are different, culturally, there are so many similarities to North America, whereas I think, we really can experience another world, and crime fiction set anywhere on the continent from North Africa down to Southern Africa could open a window into a world that those of us in North America who don't live there can experience something new. So I think we're just at the cusp of it, and I hope that Catalyst is going to ride that wave. I don't know if there's anything more you want me to comment, but I'd love to see other people take it from here.
Can I pop in there, Michael?
Yeah, please, Mike.
Jessica, I think you're very brave. I really do. Some of the feedback that I've got from North American publishers is that they find issues in South Africa, possibly elsewhere in Africa, in crime novels to be actually far more complex than they are able to deal with. And there's a reluctance to take on African writers for this very reason. And that's why I think you're really brave. In the structure of the societies here is very different and very complex. And it's very difficult, I think, for readers in North America and often sometimes in Europe to actually understand what we as crime novelists are trying to do.
If I may add to that, Michael.
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Mike, absolutely. And I think that because most South African crime fiction deals with social justice issues, and I don't see that so much in Nordic crime or in European crime or in a North American crime, but I think we also shouldn't underestimate the reader. There will be readers who will be interested in social justice issues outside of Africa. And if you look at a writer like Deon Meyer, who is huge all over the world, and he's an Afrikaans writer, and other Afrikaans-speaking writers are also growing a large international following. So I don't think we should underestimate readers, but I do agree with Mike that for readers to have to read through social justice issues might be a little bit more difficult than they expect.
You see, I think one of the interesting things here, and one of the things that Deon has done particularly well, is he's come in from the cop, he does a cop procedural. And that, I think, is well understood internationally. Whereas if you come in with a PI, although PI has a long tradition, it's very different. Or if Sifiso's done, that's a completely different take on the crime novel. And how do you adapt to that? What are you actually reading? For some people, they just don't know.
I think we just have to trust the reader. We have to try to trust the reader as well. I mean, with my novel, I wanted to tell the story from like this guy, but I wanted to absorb the reader so much so early in the book that the reader is rooting for this guy, and then from that step, I wanted to open up this world. You know what I mean? To open up this world that no one knows. But you know, through these sentences as well that are short, through prose that is very fast. So we just have to hope. I think that people love our work, and you can explain the social issues as well. I think it's on us as well to try to be as creative as we can, so that we draw the readers from other cultures in. So yeah, that's my take on this.
Yeah, I think
Mike, your books are translated into several other languages, and you're very successful in Germany. But I understand exactly what you've been saying. Something especially different about the North American market. There does seem to be a different reaction to South African crime fiction in Europe than in North America, at least so far.
Yeah, look, I would agree with you. I think Germany, France, particularly Holland, indeed as well. Maybe it's because of their relationship with Africa over decades, centuries, that there's more inclination to engage with what is written here and more understanding of the continent. Whereas I think North American crime fiction, and I'm going to put my foot right into this, it's quite simplistic. And it does not have the complexity of a crime novel that comes out of South Africa. They are very easy to understand, those books. There's no, you know, there's not too much that one doesn't know. Also, of course, American culture is so in your face everywhere that kind of, you have that background anyhow because of the movies, the television series, all the rest of it. Whereas nobody's got that side of the cultural life in South Africa or other countries in Africa, because we mustn't look at this continent as just one country, as everybody likes to live here. Ameera, you were going to say something. You got cut off. Sorry.
No, that's okay. No, I was going to say actually what you're saying is that it's also about the formula that different writers use. So, and I think that if you are writing your crime according to a formula, which I do think that some of the simpler crime works are sort of written very easy to follow, and it does feel like you could put different stories into that formula and just churn them out. Or I think, so for example, I didn't even think of my novel a crime novel initially. And I think when you are trying to say something else or play with different things, so mine has kind of a family drama mixed with a little bit of a literary novel mixed with a bit of crime. And I think when you do all of that, it is less easy to digest. It's not simple, and it's not on a platter. But I think that it's a different kind of reader that's going to gravitate to that.
Yeah, but special, I think it becomes special in this sense. And, I think special books stand out, if like you're saying, Ameera, if you mix all of that, and then a book like this will stand out, and hopefully it will reach across the seas, and it will draw audiences to other works from writers from that part of the continent.
Jessica, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, from the publishing perspective, it as a publisher of crime novels, but also literary novels, it was distinctly a decision that I had to make about Ameera's, for example. Do I put this in the crime and market it as a crime novel, or do I market it as a literary novel? And interestingly, I absolutely see Sifiso's book as a crime novel, but I'm marketing it as a coming of age novel because I think his novel is going to do better marketing wise in North America as a coming of age novel than it will as a crime novel. Whereas Ameera's, I felt this is going to do better. It'll get lost in the literary scene and is going to do better as a crime novel. And so that's a really interesting point about, Mike's talking about, the crime novel genre in North America being very simplistic and very formulaic and very, you read one and read 100, and if you just read the one, you probably read the 100. And I don't think that that's true of the crime novels I read and love, adore from Africa, particularly South Africa. And this is focusing on South African crime, but I've had to make that choice in terms of marketing. Like, how is this book going to be best positioned in the United States? And it's a different choice for different books. And it's because these are more complex and doing different things, doing the work of more than just a crime novel, I think.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Sorry. I just wanted to respond to Jessica and to say that I think the distinction between literary and other genres are fading away. There used to be this idea that literary fiction is on a totally different, higher level than crime fiction, for instance. And the crime fiction that I see coming out of South Africa and other parts of Africa is up there with the best of literary fiction. So that distinction is becoming very artificial. That's the sense I'm getting, just responding to Jessica.
You're absolutely right, but from a marketing perspective in the United States, that distinction is not being changed. Like when you send books off for review at Publishers Weekly, etc., that distinction is still very much there. But I totally agree with you that I think in terms of people's writing, those boundaries are melting down, and that's a beneficial thing.
Yeah. Can we move on to a slightly different topic? Well, it's actually quite a different topic. Marza Mengista recently spoke about how Africa can reclaim its stories. And one has to sort of stop and think about what that actually means. But I was wondering if the panel would like to comment on how that sort of works into their books. Or are we trying to actually tell Africa's stories in a context which is understandable also outside Africa? Bettina, maybe you'd like to kick off on that one.
Yeah, I don't think I'm trying in my writing to reclaim anything. What I'm doing is just telling a simple story, and people will either understand it or they won't. And that sounds harsh, I know, but we are not reclaiming Africa. We are Africa, and we're introducing Africa to a large part of the world that possibly don't know what we're about. I think Jessica said earlier that people very often don't know about all that's coming out of Africa. Certainly South Africa, but the larger Africa as well. So no, I don't think we're reclaiming anything. I think we're just staking the world rightfully.
Okay, fair enough. Does anyone else on the panel like to comment on that?
I think it brings up a really interesting thought. At the moment, a lot of people are speaking about who has the right to tell what story. And what story can you claim? How do you say this is yours? This is about me. There's a lot of sort of fiction coming out based on that person's kind of narrative standing, to feel like they identify with that person, and that they can write that voice more clearly or more concisely than someone who doesn't or isn't that person. And I think, and then there's always the thing of write what you know. But I think in any novel, you're not going to write one person, and you're not going to write one place. And I think that while many of us might be from, a lot of us might be from South Africa, we're going to write different versions of that same place. It's not going to be one thing, even though we know it. And so it's not a reclaiming. It's not mine is correct because I live here or because I grew up here. But it's the way that I see it, and it's the world that I want to place my story in, or that best suits my story.
Yeah, it's the issue that sometimes comes up about men writing female protagonists and whites writing black protagonists, and conversely, and so on and so forth. And so I guess that's still a broader issue than the actual stories themselves. What do you think, Mike?
I have to agree with Bettina, and I couldn't have put it better. Thank you, Bettina. I've been puzzling over this thing and thinking I'm not reclaiming anything. I'm just trying to record what I see out there and put it into a fictional form, which is entertaining, because that's what it has to do first and foremost, is entertain people. And crime fiction is pretty good at doing that. But reclaiming anything, certainly not. Recording, definitely.
Okay. Sifiso, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to tell my story. I mean, the world that I live in, I think it's fascinating. The characters that I see in the township, I think it's fascinating, and I think it would be fascinating to the world as well. So I'm just trying to tell my story the best way I can. Yeah, and of course, we would like to know, we would like the world to know that we exist in our little corners, in our little townships or the suburbs in Kemps Bay or wherever. I think what interests me would likely interest someone who's hungry for knowledge as well, wherever they are in the world. So that's why I'm trying. That's why I write what I write, and I just hope it reaches a wider audience.
Jessica, do you have issues in terms of, let's say, authors who are writing about Africa from outside Africa? I mean, I know you've got one German author who lived in South Africa for some time and has written 2 very good books, I thought, set in South Africa. Do you have any reservations about that scenario?
I mean, I think I'm fairly politically incorrect around this. I really love to see us disrupt the narrative of what is African. I've talked about this recently. I mean, I think a lot of stereotypes, people outside of the continent, and just don't understand the extreme diversity, don't know that, Europeans and Asians have been integrated into the continent for several hundred years. and then that there's a mixing of cultures, and for example, you know, some of the kind of knee-jerk responses around Afrikaans, for example, and not understanding, you know, that a lot of people that you know, speak Afrikaans and might write in Afrikaans are actually mixed race or whatever. There's just so many stereotypes, and so I think what I like to see is real, true engagement and an honesty around it, and an honesty around the writing. And so when I, you know, there's a lot of different ideas about what is authentic. And I think, you know, some people attach a definition to what is authentic that has to do with the identity of whoever is writing it. And I don't attach that to what is authentic, because I think, and I think it's sort of like pornography, right? That famous judge in the United States who said, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. And that's how I feel about authenticity. You know, I might not be able to exactly define, you know, it so that I can have clear boundaries around, oh, this is exactly what it means, and this is the only thing I can accept. But I know it when I see it. And that is what I'm going for in what I publish. And in how,
if we move on to sort of to what we've been talking about here and before, when you're writing, I'm asking people on the panel, anyone who'd like to comment on this, obviously, are you writing for the home market? I presume you are, obviously, in the first instance, but do you think about the overseas markets, the broader market, when you are writing? And do you think that people overseas, let's say particularly in North America, have perhaps an unrealistic idea of Africa, and that comes back to what Mike was saying earlier, that they can't relate to what we're actually writing because they don't really feel that they're in contact with this continent or this country, in the South African case?
If I could start off, I don't really think about a specific market. I don't even think about a specific reader when I tell my story. All I want to do is get the story out. Will be receptive, some might not. Some of them will be in South Africa, some might not. But ultimately, to me, the authenticity of the story comes first, and not who I'm trying to reach through it. So to me, I don't think about a reader at all.
I think about a reader, me. If it doesn't entertain me, if it doesn't entertain me, it's not going to entertain anybody else, is it?
Yeah,
True,
that is
Mike.
true.
That's true. That's true. That's true. Yeah.
But,
I also think about that way. If I'm trying to write a passage and it's you know, I want it to be exciting, I want to speed it up. If I read it the following day or after how many days I've let it rest, if it doesn't entertain me, it most probably it will not entertain the readers. So yeah. So I try to make it as entertaining for me as possible. And if it's entertaining for me, it will most probably be entertaining for other readers.
So go ahead, Mike.
I think there is a thing, is one thinking about an international reader at all, and no, accepting that because of South Africa, and because there's so many languages, and because the rhythms of English, if that's the language we're writing in, are so different to English rhythms elsewhere. Bettina, I'm sure this applies to what you're doing as well in Afrikaans, is you're bringing other rhythms into that language. Now, how do you represent those rhythms? How do you, we need to use those words. How do you then explain those words so that those words are meaningful to somebody outside the country? And to me, I hate glossaries at the back of the book. So one has to try and do it in the text while you're recounting the story. And it's something which I still haven't got the hang of all these years later, but it's one of those things that one grapples with, I think, constantly when you're dealing with crime fiction, because people are using slang, and you need to use that slang.
Mm. In some books, you find that there's a lot of mixture, bits of Afrikaans, bits of English, bits of slang, and it all works. If it's done well, it all works very well. But one has to wonder how what reaction that causes for a reader who's not familiar with that style of writing. Jessica, do you need to, do you ask your authors to edit this in some way, or how do you address that issue?
Around language?
Yep.
It's different for every book, but I do try and allow it to flow. I did stop italicizing foreign words because and let's, you know, complicate this idea of foreign, right? Because then that assumes English is the non-foreign, the default. And of course I am publishing in English, but I did stop italicizing those, and I really, you know, I don't want lots of explanations around phrases that might even be in English but aren't, they're colloquial, or I want to dive in and understand the culture and let it flow and be kind of a beautiful you know, way of absorbing it. That's how children learn language anyway. They just sort of absorb it. And I think and that's how children absorb culture too. And I think we need to do more of that and stop possibly catering to people in a way that I think is actually demeaning to them, and say, you know, here's this book, but it does still have to make sense to people that are not familiar with it. And so it's a very intricate and delicate way of doing it. And so I work with the authors as needed, depending on how it all pans out, you know, at what stage the book comes to me with that.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that you don't ask your authors to italicize foreign words because we finally persuaded both our US and our UK publishers not to do that. But it was a bit of an uphill battle originally. I think what we find is that normally when we use vernacular words, it's just in the flow of the sentence. It's so clear, at least we feel that it's so clear from the sentence itself and the context, what it actually means, that nobody is worried about it. But we do actually put a glossary at the end of the book, and then if people want to look it up, they can, but how many of them actually do so, I don't know. I guess we're getting to the stage where we could be asking for some questions from the audience. I don't know, Sarah Bell, have you been watching the chats and got any questions for us?
A few comments. There haven't been any explicit questions so far, but Stephanie and Sanja both raised interesting points. I'm not sure if anybody wants to speak on that point.
Yeah, I mean, we're very, very welcome to come in. Very welcome to. Nobody want to join in the discussion?
Maybe everybody mute yourself if you're not talking, because we're getting feedback from somebody.
Feedback.
I mean, there is kind of one point that Stephanie Kemp made, is that she was surprised to see Sifiso's book Youngblood qualified as a crime novel. And I know that it's something that Jessica and the Catalyst team talked a lot about, of whether or not to consider Youngblood a crime novel or a coming of age novel or some mixture of both of them. I don't know if Sifiso, maybe you want to talk to the point of kind of how you envisioned this book and where you think it kind of crosses those genre lines.
This is a question that I've been asked in almost every panel that I have been in. And to tell you the truth, I think it's a coming of age story. It's a book about fathers and sons, or fathers sons lacking having father figures, and it's a family story, but it happens that it's set in a world of crime for the main character. Yeah, that's what I think of Young Blood. And you know, Stephanie has been reading my collection of short stories as well now, and she likes the she likes the female character that I came up with, who is in most of the short stories. She just likes how I have you know I've phrased everything around her, and I think for most readers they want to see the things that are on the periphery of, or you know, you can put crime at the center, but if you can put the other things on the periphery as well, uh, they like to see that. They like to see the family background. They like to see relationships with siblings or children and all of that. Yeah. So I think Young Blood is a coming of age story that is set in a world of crime. That's my final saying, and I'm sticking to that.
Okay, well, we're sort of getting towards the end of the panel. I think it's been very interesting indeed. But what I'd like to close off with is just to ask each member of the panel if they could tell us who their favorite African crime writer or thriller writer is. But the person's not allowed to be on the panel, please. And the second question is, what's your next book? What's your next project going to be? So, Bettina, would you like to kick that off?
I'm going to, for a change, be diplomatic and not mention any names, because there are lots of people whose writing I enjoy. Some of them on the, all of them on the panel, in fact. But I'm not going to. I can't choose a favorite. I love a lot of different things. My next project is the fourth novel in the Nikki de Vere series. So Nikki is going to go on to her next adventure.
Any possibility that these will be translated into English at some point?
I'm holding my fingers crossed. There's no talk at the moment, but who knows? Maybe sometime in the future, I'm hoping.
Well, so am I. Mike, what about you? What's next, and who would you name if you're willing to name anybody?
I'm also going to be diplomatic, and I know that Bettina's already cornered that one, but I'm afraid I'm going to do it as well. I don't like choosing favorites, so I'm going to leave it at that. I've got a novel coming out. It's the fourth in the Fish and Vicky series. It comes out in March. It's called The Rabbit Hole. And I have just finished the fifth, and I'm about to sit down to that task that all writers really love, called rewriting. That's where I will be for the next sort of month, I suppose. But yeah, that's it. That's it for me.
Okay, well, I'm really looking forward to both those books when they come out. Ameera, are you going to name one? Maybe I should have not used the word favorite. Maybe if I'd gone back, if I'd rephrased that question and asked you to name one or two mystery or thriller writers that you really like, I might have got more of a response. Would anybody like to take that one on and take it in that context? I'm going to go back to you quickly. You say you like lots of thriller writers and writers. Can you name just a couple? Not your favorite.
I am going to claim my right to silence.
The diplomatic immunity. Mike?
All right. There it is. Malanan. This was the one that kicked it off. A Beautiful Place to Die. And therefore, I'm not being diplomatic. But anyway, I think she writes bloody well.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, Ameera, we've changed the question now so that you don't have to feel that you're singling out one writer. Any writer you'd like, any crime or thriller writer you'd like to mention that you really like, really impresses you?
Well, yeah, maybe as a way of excusing myself, I'll say the writer that I read most recently was Lauren Bierkes. And what I really enjoyed is that I never thought of myself as a sci-fi or fantasy person, but I also think that because she does this beautiful mix of genres, that I can read. I really enjoy her writing. It was surprising for me.
Which was the book that you recently read?
Recently was Broken Monsters.
Oh, Broken Monsters.
An old one, but.
And your next project? Have you got another book planned?
I do, but my life at the moment feels a bit overwhelming, to be honest with you. But yes, another book hopefully soon. Hopefully when I can breathe again. Yeah.
Sifiso, what about you?
In terms of writers, oh God, I take so many things from different writers. But in terms of a thriller writer, I will go for Angela Makolwa. I just like her perspective on. I know I like her because she tells it from the female perspective, and she just has a her ideas are just way out there, you know. Yeah. So in terms of my next work, I've been writing. There's a book that I've been writing for quite a while. Yeah. So I'm just trying to chip away at that. Yeah. And I write short stories all the time. So maybe the next collection of short stories might even overtake the novel. Who knows? But I just try to chip away at the novel because it's a bit of a complex story. But yeah, I'm still working on that.
Jessica, coming to you last but not least, I've been a bit remiss in not pointing out that you're a successful author in your own right and writes set in Africa. What are your writing projects, and are you willing to mention an author or two that you really like?
Sure, I will mention an author or two that I really like. And I'm so glad that you didn't make it about the most favorite one, because that would be impossible for me to do. I mentioned to him at the beginning, I'm a huge fan of Andrew Brown's work. I love his recent nonfiction too, which actually I think does, his memoirs about being a police reserve officer. And I think those really do translate well outside of the specifics too. And I'm a big fan of his work, so I'll just mention him. But there are a lot of others I could. I actually, funny enough, am starting a science fiction crime novel series with my brother, who's a co-writer with me for another fantasy series that dealt with death. And this one is also going to deal with death. But it's set, in the future. And so, funny enough, I'm actually dipping my toes into all sorts of genre crossing fiction that does deal with crime as well.
And collaborative writing. So it'll be interesting to hear your perspective on that at some time in some other panel, probably.
Yeah, I'll just say very briefly that I'm writing with my brother, who's one of my best friends and who grew up with me. And so I can't imagine writing in this way with anybody else, because, there's no BS, and no hurt feelings and, all of that. So.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I guess it really remains only for me to thank all the people on the panel very much for their contributions this afternoon or this evening, wherever you are, and to the audience for joining us. And I look forward to seeing the results of putting this all together after you've cut out the bits where I'm asking questions with my mic muted. And thanks again to the team.
Thank you very much,
everyone. Lovely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining, everybody. It was a pleasure to have you guys.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.